Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of DES109 Graphic Design 1. It is week 2 of Mod 3 in 2019, and this is our first live session of the week, where we're going to go over some critiques from last week and kind of do a little review, and then just keep moving forward, keep plugging along in this mod, and where we're learning what graphic design is all about. So let us get started. So we have, like I said, week 2. This is our agenda for today. We're going to have a quick review from last week. We're going to go over a few of the submissions from assignment 1. We'll do a little bit of critiquing, and then we'll actually go over the overview for this week, as well as some details. If we have time, we'll go over the discussion. If not, we will do that tomorrow. Excuse me, along with our demo for this week's assignment. So, course overview. Last week, what have we done? We talked a little bit about design trends. We were talking about putting together a poster for a punk 60s rock influenced band, if that could get any more convoluted. And exactly, we were talking a little bit about how we could take previous trends and kind of emulate it while also creating something new at the same time. In our assignment, we were working on those flashcards where we did a little bit of research on some eras, some time periods, and the styles that came out of those eras. And then we had the assessment that quizzed us on design principles and gestalt theory, and that information was based out of the readings and Lisa Hammersheim's pre-recorded lecture there. This week, we're talking a little bit more about where did we come from, and we're discussing what the elements of designs are, and we're kind of going over the principles one more time, and we're talking about how the elements and the principles actually work together. So we're in the discussion, we're talking about those menus and exactly how we have those two items of design coming together to create an aesthetic layout. We are going to be putting together a poster this week, so we'll be, excuse me, my goodness. Sorry about that. People calling on my work line at 20 of 9 at night. So like I said, we're talking about the poster, or we're going to be doing a poster where we're going to be provided with some text copy, and we're going to actually take one of the design eras that we were just working with in the flashcards, so one of the 3 that you worked with last week, and we'll be putting together a poster based on those 2 things. And then our assessment for this week, because I believe I did mention in the lectures last week, any of the assessments going forward, dear Lord, sorry about that. Any of the assessments going forward are actually not quizzes. They are projects. So we will be doing a little bit of a self-critique and justifying our decisions and our design process, and kind of taking step by step how we came to those decisions in the poster. So those 2 things are going to be very directly related. In week 3, we're talking about, we're going to be talking about the past and current trends as well. We're going to be actually discussing a little bit about finding creativity and inspiration, because that's a huge part of the job, is trying to always be very creative, and that can get very tedious and very difficult. So we'll kind of share with each other some importance of finding different inspiration avenues and collaborate on where we might find inspiration, and helping each other to work through those artist blocks that you'll end up having at some point in your career. The assignment for that week is Learning from the Past, Part 1. We'll be doing a poster, which is essentially the advertising makeover that we're going to be doing this week. It's essentially kind of the same thing, where we're going to be emulating a particular style. You'll do a little bit more research on that next week, and putting together a poster based on some provided text copy. And that's in addition to putting together a mood board, which I will actually go over next week. And then design and social media, we'll be talking about the importance of social media today and how the digital portion of design differs slightly from straight up print design, and how the design for that, it's really more not photography, imagery, excuse me, I was going to say the wrong word, more imagery rather than type. And we'll talk a little bit about how that kind of lays out. And then in the fourth week, we are talking about your design presence, your online portfolio, why that's important. We'll be creating your portfolio on Behance, and then making revisions for your assessment, making revisions to your poster for next week. So just some house cleaning. Week one, missing a few assignments, so I just wanted to reiterate, if you have not passed in your projects from last week, please make sure to get them in. You can get them in by the end of this week, and I am still able to grade it just because I'm going to have a late deduction. The rest of the assignments will be graded by Wednesday morning. And I believe I had put up, let me just double check right here in the announcements on how to view your feedback and your grades in the event that, yep, here we go, how to see your grade, feedback, and comments. Excuse me, so we have in our assignments here. I really prefer to leave feedback in the PDF annotations because I feel like it's a lot easier than having to go back and forth between the rubric and then looking at the image, because I can mark down exactly where I'm talking about. I will even sometimes make little horrible drawings because the drawing tools in Canvas are not great, but I feel like it's a lot easier, not only for me, but for you guys to be able to see that. So if you're having trouble, just let me know. And then if you did actually submit your assignments on time this week, or this past week, and you maybe are not happy with your grade, feel free to make some revisions and resubmit it. Just let me know, and then I can do a regrade on that. So again, quick review from week one. We discussed the inspiration from the past and the blending of the design styles. When will grades be posted? Heather is asking in our chat. Grades will be posted. They post as I do them. So yesterday I went through, oh goodness, I just hit the keyboard, sorry about that. I went through a whole bunch of them. Excuse me, I'll be doing a little bit more tonight and then tomorrow night, so they should be done by Wednesday morning. So you will probably get a notification when your discussion one is done, when your assignment one is done, and then your assessment, I think, is probably already done because that one automatically grades. You are very welcome. So again, for the quick review, the discussion, we talked about the inspiration for the past, talking about putting those different design styles to a little bit of design history. The assignment was the design history flashcards that we'll look up in a minute. And then your quiz. If you received any missed answers, just make sure you look up the answer, make notes, and then pay attention to that in the future, because that's really the most important part of these quizzes, so that you get a really good understanding of all of the principles here. So before we actually get started on a critique, I do want to make sure that I mention I had an announcement go up, so that if you did not want your grades, your assignments actually critiqued in the Monday sessions, please feel free to just shoot me a message and let me know. I don't leave any names on the project, so everything is anonymous, but sometimes there are still people that are a little bit more sensitive or a little bit more concerned about their work. So I am absolutely more than willing to not critique someone that is a little bit concerned about it. But just let me know ahead of time. So we have giving and receiving critiques today. The first thing to do when considering giving a helpful critique, giving a critique, because you're going to find that when you are working with other designers, you're going to find that you're going to do that all the time. Someone's going to come up to you and say, what do you think about this? Do these two items work together? Should I make this larger? Does this make sense? And sometimes you'll look at something and go, yeah, I don't have any suggestions for you. And then other times you're going to look at something and think to yourself, oh my God, that's horrific. So you obviously want to make sure that you are keeping the designer's feelings in mind, but it is absolutely possible to provide a beneficial critique in a positive manner. And that is really, critiques are really the biggest way, the most fundamental way for us as designers to grow. We are learning what other people think of our work, how they view our work, and sometimes we don't realize that our message is not coming across the way that we want them to. So you'll talk to other designers, you'll maybe even talk to non-designers. Sometimes that's even the best thing to do, because you're going to be asking for a completely different point of view. So the first thing I always say is the rule of 3. Try to come up with not only 3 maybe improvements that could be made, but 3 positive aspects of the composition already. Some people try to say to do like a compliment sandwich, start with the positive and then maybe something that could be improved upon and then another compliment. Sometimes I think that can sound a little fake, because it's kind of like a standard rule. But the way I look at it is, if I can come up with 3 different things that are positive and 3 different things that are negative, I don't have to do them in any order. So it does seem a little bit more genuine, even if I'm, trying very hard, I guess is the good thing, the way to put it. And it isn't really hard to find positive items in a layout. So be specific in what you like. Don't just say that you like something. Simply giving your opinion is not necessarily what the designer is looking for. They're looking to try to figure out, okay, did these colors work well together, and why or why not? Does this imagery convey the event that my poster is supposed to be advertising? I didn't realize that this maybe might be a sensitive subject, so you know what, I'll take that wording out. So be very specific so that the designer can learn from, and I wouldn't even say mistakes, just learn from their design history, their design experience. Oops. Consider those design principles, CRAP. We don't want our colleagues' work looking like crap. We want to make sure that they can produce the best designs possible as well. We would want them to obviously provide us with that same kind of feedback. And then in addition to that, any feedback that you're giving to someone else, make sure that you're flipping it around and actually applying it to your own work as well. It's very easy to be critical of someone else's work and sometimes completely glaze over the fact that you're actually not completing those same steps. I know, just for example, and this isn't necessarily a negative or a positive thing, I know that I have a tendency to stick with a very limited color palette, and I don't do it on purpose. It's just what I happen to be drawn to. And when I see that I'm doing that, I put the layout together, I'll see it, and I very often will just automatically switch colors up because I don't want my work to look the same all the time. Fonts are another thing. You're going to probably find that you're going to gravitate towards very similar fonts, or maybe your choice fonts. My screen print work, it's the exact same thing. Everybody looks for the exact same kind of look in t-shirts and sweatshirts and that kind of thing, and it can be very tricky to kind of mix it up to make sure that you're coming up with unique designs all the time. So and this goes in, for digital and print work. Try to make sure that you're thinking about what you're talking to your colleague about and saying, do I do this? Do I have a tendency to make my artwork not really balanced? Do I consider alignment? Am I maybe, using too many fonts? There are just some things to kind of think about. If the person, the designer that you are speaking with doesn't take your suggestions, don't be offended. They may simply know a little bit more about the client than you do. Maybe your suggestion doesn't fit with the message that they're trying to convey. Maybe the suggestion that you're providing is a little bit too similar to something that their client has already done before. So just don't be offended. You are providing your feedback, and that's really all you can do. However, on the flip side, if you are the one being given that suggestion or that feedback, make sure to really take into consideration why you're not taking that suggestion, and don't simply dismiss it just because. Make sure that you are seriously thinking about, okay, is there a real reason why I don't want to make this change, or am I just being picky? You know, and in the end, you may still decide, you know what, that revision does not make sense for this project. And in the end, you are the designer. Just make sure to take all thoughts and all ideas into play. And then also, I think this is my last thing here. Remember that your work is not you. If you are the one that is being critiqued, do not take it personally. It took me a long time once I got into this industry to realize that I maybe was designing, every day, 8 hours a day. However, I was definitely getting plenty of clients that didn't want my ideas, that maybe they just were not really interested in something very creative. They wanted kind of a simple, boring kind of layout. And it's not that I got hurt. I got aggravated more than anything else. I got annoyed that I would spend all sorts of time and energy in putting something together that they didn't end up wanting. And it eventually became a much less stressful venue of work when I realized that it just didn't work for them at that particular time. Maybe sometime down the road they would like, a design like that. Maybe it wasn't right for that client, and that's totally fine. I hung it, into the back of my mind and kept it for the future. And there have been instances where I have reused designs because it just wasn't for the first person, but it was for the second person. So, okay, right. So we are going to get ready for our critiques now. So let us get going. And I want to make sure I can. Heather, I know Amber said that she was going to have a hard time possibly typing. Heather, can you still hear me? Because I just had a very random message come up over here from Zoom that it disconnected on me, and I just want to make sure that I'm still recording over here. Perfect. All right, we have a yes, I can. So let us pull up the Acrobat. So what I'm going to do, I have 3 different submissions here. I'm going to do one card for each. I think 2 of these actually have Victorian era pieces, so I'm actually going to not use it for one of them. And I actually, this is the one I wanted to do for here. Victorian, let's see. Actually, I'll do that one, and then we'll do this one. Perfect. So I got 3 different design eras. So I have 3 different students here. There are 3 sets of assignments. So we'll just go over some of the different points here, pull out some of the different principles of design in these, so that not only can our students, Heather and Amber today, that are in class can take a look and kind of get an idea what we were kind of looking at or looking for this assignment, and then also obviously you people watching the recording as well. So we have, first off, this postmodern style era flashcard, which first of all, I absolutely adored this typeface right here. And actually, I don't know that adore is really the word for it, but that almost sounds too cutesy. But I just thought this kind of collage-y, kind of look to this typeface worked really, really well for the postmodern era, which had a lot of different effects. You can tell by this one right here. We have these pixelated or Ben-Day dot kind of kind of imagery, almost looking like a newspaper, but we have these larger dots here, this triangle, this funky kind of effect, layering all over the place. You know, so we had a collage type look to this particular era. I almost, you know, get kind of like a feeling of scrap paper, glitter, glue kind of, you know, very tactile kind of feeling when I look at a lot of that work. So this typeface worked really well. We have the majority of the information here is centered, and actually where my annotate tools, here we go. Just want to make sure I have, there we go. So we have the majority of this stuff right in here is centered. So even though this text on the bottom is left justified and the top stuff here is center justified, you can see it's all centered within the same block still, which is good. We have a little bit of contrast because we have the fancier collaging kind of magazine cutout typeface, and then a much more plain sans serif font below to balance that out, which is really good. Make sure, and this is incredibly common, so if you happen to do this in your flashcards, don't worry about it. This is just something to keep in mind as you go forward. Be careful of line breaks within words. Typically, clients would prefer not to see things like that unless it happens to be in something that has a large volume of type, such as a novel, a magazine, a newspaper, that kind of thing. In posters, you know, design, I mean, a CD design covers, you know, flashcards maybe, they're probably going to want to have you decide upon a different place for a return instead. So something like this, for example, we could have maybe worked with a horizontal scaling a little bit to make the text a little bit more narrow so that we could fit a little bit more on one line, or we could do the complete opposite, maybe expand the text box a little bit further out, maybe by just bringing it out a little bit more. Maybe that would include a little bit more of the text on that line. And actually that might have even been a little bit, let me see, if we were to do this, there we go, then this margin over here would actually have been about the same as over here, maybe a little bit, I think it's probably a little bit less over here right now because I made my red box a little bit too big. But you know, so these are the kinds of things that you guys will learn to kind of watch for. I did a brochure within the last 8 months, and I proofed that 8-page brochure, and I still missed one. So it's very easy to do. Then when you fix it, if by adjusting the horizontal scaling or opening up that text box, if that doesn't fix it, or if it maybe breaks up another line, you just add an enter in between a couple of the words and you're good to go. This person kept a good amount of space in between here. So we have proximity, where they included the time frame and the designer together and kind of broke it up. We have a summary of the era, so the characteristics, the style characteristics up top here, and then down here the contemporary application. So we have it broken up pretty nicely. We could maybe use just a little bit more spacing in here. It is definitely not the worst that I've ever seen. I've seen some that are a little bit maybe even closer to the image. You know, we could probably scooch it over just 1 or 2 taps of the arrow key and be good to go. It's got a fairly decent amount of space all the way around, and actually I really love this light blue in the background because it provides a little bit of repetition coming from this image right here, and kind of creates a nice cohesive look throughout the flashcard. So very nice job. And we're going to go to the, oops, I'm still got my annotation tool. There we go. And so now we have our color palette in the back here, which they obviously have replicated some of the elements, the design elements from that image. We have the triangle, we have those dots we can see right here. And actually it looks like they probably did 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 5. I thought maybe they did it identically because of it's so close to those two images. And this is really kind of a neat way to do this. We have this asymmetrical look, but having the dots go all the way across and extending past this triangle, it kind of grounds this triangle in, so it creates a nice balance. We could probably have even brought this guy down a little bit more for a little bit more balance, but that's okay. We have the citations within this block here, and it's always tricky with the websites because they're so long and they end up with the text breaks right, or the line breaks right in there. I wouldn't worry about that happening. Maybe we could have put them up here just for a little bit more room, but I think they probably wanted to emphasize this, just this area over here. We have enough contrast so we can read it without a problem. And I mean, just like I said, just otherwise very, very nicely done. We have a nice layered effect there, just like the postmodern era. We'll go on to number 2. We have the Art Deco era, which the way that this particular person laid this out was very different. And I absolutely love this piece. I have no idea who did this, but this image is the first that I've seen like this for the Art Deco era. And that is just very, very interesting. It's got kind of a really dynamic, futuristic kind of look to it. So, which the name Boccioni comes to mind. He was an Italian futurist sculptor, and just very much looks like that. We have the diagonal that comes up here, and that's very typical of Art Deco. There's a lot of like vertical, kind of emphasizing height with a lot of the buildings. And this guy just reminds me of Falcor from the Neverending Story, which is probably dating myself, but that's okay. So this individual decided that they were going to do a center flashcard. And again, this is very different from what I've seen so far. Not a lot of people do this. They decided to break it up a little bit. So we have the era here with the dates on either side, which is kind of neat. And then including some of the information on both sides. This is a layout that absolutely could work, especially with this image that, whether it's a square or the student made it into a square, I'm not really sure, but it can definitely work with that. We have about the same amount of space over here and over here. We just need to make sure that we're considering proximity between the text and the image, because like I said, we're kind of coming up on the image a little bit too much, so it's almost giving the impression that the image is kind of getting pushed out by the text. We could probably even, why do I do that? There we go. Probably even just kind of do this right here. Not even that much of a difference, but if you bring it in just by that much, the image would have a nice padding around it so that the text isn't, encroaching on its space, and the image has the space that it deserves. It has a good amount of contrast here. We have the Art Deco, the nice bold dark font, I'm sorry. And even the size of the dates, that kind of creates a neat look. If we maybe put the Art Deco name up here, just a little bit, could even be kind of overlapping. I think our dates here would have just a little bit more room, and you'd be able to see them a little bit better. You could even still keep them on the left and the right, because that's a really different look. So I think that's kind of neat. The text, I wouldn't necessarily have picked this particular font, but I actually think because of the nice smooth curvilinear lines in this particular image, I think that this script works really well, actually. Just when you are doing, when you're using a lot of text, when you're using a script font for it, just make sure that you're considering legibility, because scripts can become a little bit difficult to read if there's too much text or too much type. So just something to keep in mind. I think that this one kind of worked nicely. And, oh, I'm still, God, I hate this annotate tool. There we go. And we have a really kind of neat color palette here. We could probably have maybe done something a little bit different just for the citation here, just to make it a little bit more readable, because when it goes over the different colors, you know, the blue into the gold into the darker gold, it gets a little tricky sometimes reading it. Maybe even just flipping the, God, I hate the fact that I have to close this out and then open it back up every time I want to use it. Even if we were just to flip the swatches so that they went this way instead, it would have probably provided a little bit more room for the citation, and then it wouldn't be going over those lines there. But they are all approximately this. If I'll bet you if I had created one block and then duplicated it, these would all be about the same width, all, you know, butting each other nicely. We have an even amount of space around there. So another, you know, well done card in a completely different manner from the first one. I always love to see the creativity that you guys all show. There we go. And oops, I closed out my third one. Whoops. Hold on. Let me pull that back up. Instead of opening it, I hit the X. And I do want that third one. Okay, here we go. And actually, let me just double check, make sure what else we got in here. We got the, oh, actually, you know what? Grunge era. Actually, I'll do this one instead. So the grunge era, back in the late 1900s, 1980s, 1990s, very distressed kind of looking, lots of hand-drawn type, hand-drawn imagery, distressed looks, lots of textures. This particular person, actually, I didn't even, because I hadn't even looked at this particular one initially, this particular person has a decent amount of space in between the image and the text. This is kind of what I was mentioning. So you can actually, you got a clear, definitive area here for the text. So there's no confusion as to, you know, what's image and what's type. This person did something very similar to what the first person did, where they have the main body of text is essentially left justified. We have an indent here, obviously, but is essentially left justified. And then the top is all center justified, but, or center aligned. If you notice, is the exact same kind of thing. The title and everything up here is centered within that block. So also did a very nice job keeping that aligned. They've chosen a couple of fonts that are very appropriate. We have, you know, this almost looks like a typewriter. And actually, I can't tell if the top font is the same as the middle. I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll in here and it's, there we go. Because it almost looks like they're very similar. But yeah, it looks like they're similar, but they're not identical, which is actually kind of neat. Sometimes when you use fonts that are really too similar, sometimes they can kind of clash, they can kind of fight with each other. But the fact that this particular headline is so bold compared to this second line, it creates a nice contrast. Probably could have even, actually we have a lot of empty space here, so we probably could have even made this whole area up here much bigger and then maybe scooched everything down so that it was maybe, there we go, maybe centered this way. So the center of this whole block right here kind of lined up with the center here. And then even if we had a little bit of extra space on the bottom and the top, it would be even. But we have the repetition where we're using the title here is pink, just like the title here. So we have that. We have contrast in not only the different typefaces, but also hierarchy, where we had the main headline, where the grunge era. is the largest portion, and then we have, you know, it's almost like a subheading right here is a little bit smaller, the date is a little bit smaller, so you know you want to make sure that you focus on the more important portions. Okay, and we go here. We have a really interesting kind of color palette. The strokes probably weren't, the outline strokes probably weren't necessary, because now we have the pink against the black isn't really what we're looking at here, because we have this stroke in here that is kind of juxtaposed in between them, so between the two of them. So we're looking actually at the pink and how it interacts with this one, as opposed to this bigger block of black. And I can't. I think it's a black, but I'm not sure. And that blacks are tricky on screen, and actually in print. Excuse me. Depending on whether it's a rich black or a CMYK or whatever, sometimes it can show a little bit funny. However, this particular person decided that they were going to put their references right in the center here, which was a pretty logical thing to do, and they actually have it centered both vertically and horizontally. But maybe could maybe scooch it over just a little bit on the left hand side here. But again, very, very nicely done. All three very, very nicely done. So let's move on. So we are going to have our first question, the first secret question of the week today. Da, da, da. Our first secret question is, what was the high temperature yesterday, March 24th, in Salt Lake City, Utah? Heather, where are you from again? I think, are you, I know I had someone in the introduction discussion mention that they were from the country, but I don't know if that was you or if it was someone else. Mason City, Iowa. Well, you are definitely not in Salt Lake City then. No, and Amber, I think, is the one in Minnesota, I think is what she had said. Sometimes it's, yeah, I remembered this week. So we had yesterday, or we were in New England here, I think we hit like 55 yesterday. I was so excited. That's why I've got not only the snowflakes here, but we've got my daffodils, because out front in my yard, that our daffodils are stupid, and they decided to come out in January. And then every year they get snowed on. But yesterday it was 46 degrees, according to the site that I make sure that I follow for Salt Lake's temperature. I like to keep an eye on it just to make sure that I know what's going on over there. So, okay, so we have quite a bit of time actually. I like breezed through those three. So you know what we'll do is, normally tomorrow I would have gone over the discussion and the assignment. So I'll do the discussion and the assessment stuff today, and then we probably will have time for even maybe one more or two more critiques. So I can even do a little bit more of that, which I always love having extra time for. So let us go over. It does go over, because I don't think, yep, there we go. That was the last slide. So let us pull up. Now I'll actually even go over the media for this week too. Make sure that, oh, no, that's not the one I want. That's not the one I want. All right, this week's media, week 2. Our pre-recorded lecture, the 2 hours, that I cannot emphasize enough how important it is. We're talking about the elements, like I mentioned, and how they integrate actually with the design principles, and we'll also be reviewing the design principles of well. Contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Excuse me, there are a couple of articles to read, visual elements, talking about the design elements and giving you not only some definitions, but some image references, and then a copywriting tool. Oops, excuse me, you know what the heck, we'll go over it real quick. So just some kind of tips on how to get your message across and making sure that, you know, you're kind of, I'm at a loss for words here. You're making sure you're not doing this visually when you're not stumbling. You want to make sure that you have a clear idea, you have a clear message, and then both of them are cohesive and they're going together. It is very, very, very easy as a designer to have an idea as to what you want to say and how you want to say it. And then when you show it to other people, have them say, I have no idea what you're trying to tell me. I very often will consult with my Spanish teacher husband to get his idea, because he is actually he's pretty creative, but he's not an artist, so he thinks in a completely different manner than I do, and it's always great to get his point of view. Maybe I will even talk to my lawyer father or my my mother who works with him, or even my math-minded mother-in-law, because they all have very, very different ways of thinking. My mom's a little bit more creative. The other two are very much more logical, and not that they're not creative, they're creative in their own way, but their minds work a little bit differently. And if I can't get across to them, I don't know who else I might not be getting across to. So, and then this week we are working in Illustrator. So those are the videos in the lynda.com playlist, talking a little bit about working with type and the various tools or various basic tools that you'll be using. But if there happens to be something else that you are trying to do in Illustrator that you know, it's not addressed here, or maybe you've never done it before and it's a completely, you know, it's something you're trying to go above and beyond a particular effect you're trying to use, you absolutely can Google it for additional videos, obviously, and feel free to reach out to me and I can direct you as well. We have that. Let's go up to our discussion. You know, modules. And our discussion, the elements and principles of design. I have to put up the picture that I took just the other day. I went out to dinner or lunch, or I don't even remember. I went out for some meal with my family, and I took a picture of the menu that that was in the restaurant because I thought it was interesting and I knew I was coming up on this discussion. So our discussion this week, we are talking about how to use the elements with the principles of design. So various elements that are kind of like your main ones that you might think of: point, line, shape, color, texture, and type. Also can throw in patterning in there, and how you actually will use them with contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Our prompt is that we are working with a coffee shop owner who had designed their menu themselves to, who knows, maybe you wanted to save a little bit of money. I know plenty of small businesses that do that kind of thing, and you can tell. So this particular coffee shop owner wanted to keep everything kind of basic, different colors of brown, using all sorts of different fonts, and the customers hated it. So you're pretending that you have redesigned the menu and you're going to explain to them what it was that you did and why you think that that works better than their previous design. So again, our prompt in describing to the coffee shop owners what you did to redesign the menu, how would you explain design element and design principle usage? And then how do those elements and principles relate? How do they work together? Why do they work together? How and why are they working together the way that you have put them together as opposed to the way that they put them together? What principles might have been lacking in the original menu? Which, I mean, that's typically very, very often to see that sometimes. And I have here, why might the design elements in the new menu now support the principles? That's exactly what I was just saying. How do the elements and principles relate the way that you put them together? How do they support it? So we have, I mean, these two examples, these are not necessarily from the prompt. These are just two that I had come up with that I found that were fairly decent examples of I mean, this isn't a horrible design. I've seen horrible designs, but it's not a great design and a much better design. And, you know, what elements between those two and what principles between those two might we see in this one that have been improved upon from this first one. Menus are all over the place. And oh, we have a couple responses already. There we go. Good. They obviously are all over the place. They are not only in restaurants, they come into your mailbox. They are in newspaper flyers. They are everywhere because people got to eat, obviously. So yeah, we got that. We have our modules. Let's go to our assessment for the week. Actually, you know what? I won't do the assessment today now that I'm thinking about it, because you kind of need to know we kind of need to talk about the assignment before we do that. So let's pull up another one or two images here from the, ooh, goodness, there we go. From our submissions. And here we go. I like this one. That was a very interesting one. Yeah, actually, we'll do that one. And let me see. Yeah, we'll do this one too. All right. So Heather, we have a few minutes. I might pick on you for a second if you don't mind. Yeah, we have heroic realism, which this probably, if I had to guess, this was probably from the Captain America movie, because this looks like that. I can never remember the actor's name, but this is definitely the type of imagery you would have found during the time. So if heroic realism was very, typically had one figure in it, sometimes two, but very often just the one. They typically had some kind of message that was patriotic or some other kind of political, propaganda that they were trying to promote. This particular individual, Heather, could you come up with any example on this card of contrast that they have used? And I promise I won't pick on you too much. And while Heather is thinking about that or typing, because I know that that can be a little time consuming too, we also have some repetition here with colors. We have the blue on the outside and we have the blue on the inside of the image here. We also have this, actually this almost looks like serpentine font, but it's not quite, but it's a nice bold font that's very similar to what's in the poster here. And Heather says the font choices as well as the bold blue border sort of frame the image. So we have the bold blue, excuse me, I am having a hard time today. The blue on the outside, in addition to it being a repetition, or an example of repetition, it does actually kind of frame this image in, so it kind of makes it jump out. And yes, it actually, she says it makes the darkness of the poster pop into the focal point. Yeah, exactly. So I was actually already saying that when you mentioned it, so I'm glad we were on the same wavelength there. We have, like she also mentioned as well, the fonts. We have two different fonts. This is, it's basically a sans serif font, but it does have these little teeny tiny serifs on there. So that in conjunction with the sans serif font, which this is probably an Arial or maybe Helvetica. Looking at that R, it probably is Arial. That balances this much more bold, slightly fancier font up top. There's also the different sizes that we have here. We could probably have made this a little bit bigger, maybe something in between this size and this size. Probably could have even made this heroic realism a little bit bigger, but that's okay. We have it all center aligned down here. So actually this individual also did what two of the three that we were looking at before did. And I'm not necessarily saying that our second example didn't have it. I just don't remember off the top of my head, where we have our left justified text, but you can see that the center justified text is almost centered within this box. You can see there's a little bit more room over here, and actually it looks like maybe the dates aren't quite lined up with heroic realism, but you can see where the student was going with it. I'll have a little bit of empty space down here. We could probably have put in a little bit more information for that, but the fact that they chose to do a portrait oriented card made a lot of sense, since we have this portrait layout image here. And maybe that's actually why there isn't a ton of text here, because we want to make sure that they maybe didn't have a lot of room there. So we have our color palette here, which is interesting that they decided to do like a little silhouette here, as in addition to just some shapes here for that. Our citation here is a little bit maybe too close to the edges, so we could have maybe nudged it to the right a little bit and maybe down a little bit, or maybe even centered it within the block here. But there is definitely plenty of contrast. This light blue against that maroonish, it definitely stands out. Was there any green? I don't know that there was any green really up in the top here, but definitely the maroon or the red and the navy blue are definitely indications of that. And we'll do one more quick one. We have actually the, there you go. Oh, I think it would have been easier on the eye if the box was maybe a bit shorter. Let me go back over it real quick. Hold on. The maroon one, is that what you're talking about? With the text centered. Yeah, I think that's what you mean, right? The citation, yes. Yes, you're absolutely right. Let me actually bring my tools back up. So what Heather is saying here is if maybe the box itself had been a little bit shorter. Oh, sorry, Amber. Sorry about that. The contrast is good with the space of the white and blue. My stars is as popular formula. Sorry, your comments kind of blurred together because I was going back and forth. But I do want to make sure that I give credit where credit's due. So we have if we were to shorten this box a little bit, it does look like it's a little bit more centered. Or we could, like as Amber was just saying, center this text essentially just like that. And then you end up with a little space up here, a little bit of space down here, but it kind of balances. Funny because people I'll call you Heather all the time. Well, I'm sorry about that. I'm just one more person. Oh, it's funny how that happens. All right, how much time? We got 3 more minutes. You know what? I will actually, maybe I'll go back to this one tomorrow, but I will actually let you guys, I have had a tendency to go over a little bit, so we'll actually end a little bit early today, a couple of minutes. Do either of you ladies have any questions for me tonight? Want to make sure that I give enough time at the end in case there are questions. Any questions at all? No, I have been active in the comments, but I've been listening. Good. All right, and Heather doesn't have any questions either. So for those of you listening, for you ladies, and for those of you listening, I hope you have a great night, and make sure to tune in tomorrow for the demonstration on the assignment. Have a good one.